Oh, yeah. It's...
Okay, we're streaming live on YouTube, and I'm setting up the Facebook right now.
All right.
And we're live on Facebook. I'm going to shut the door.
Great.
If you want to go on the link and share that out. So we're live now. Actually, not yet. Not quite.
It says I don't have a network connection.
All right.
So when we go to Facebook to...
Yeah, I invite you to go like the podcast.
It says I don't have an internet connection. I can't get,
Oh, really?
I can't get a connection down here. Oh, shoot. Excuse me.
There's a Wi-Fi.
Okay, sure.
NBC.
NBC Studio.
Yeah. The password is capital MBC, lowercase, Wi-Fi, WIFI, exclamation point.
It's connecting. Checking the quality. I'm connected. Okay, now where do I go to now?
Now go to the Black and Rich Facebook page,
Okay, here I am.
and then
It's live.
there's a live stream. So if you hit the share it, let me see your phone. How do you go?
It's a Samsung, so I don't know if that makes a difference.
So go back to the page if you can. Hey, Frankie? Frankie?
I'm ready whenever you are.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining me on the Black and Rich Podcast. Podcast designed for Black entrepreneurs to get in business, stay in business, and be able to pass on generational wealth. This week, I'm very excited to introduce a MD in practice, Kevin Stockard.
Hello. Good.
How you doing today, Kevin?
Good evening. How are you?
Good.
Thank you very much for bringing me on.
Of course. So, I haven't met a lot of Black doctors.
Sure.
Which is why I wanted to have you on to hear your story.
Sure.
Why did you want to become a doctor?
Becoming a doctor was actually my first career choice up through the time I was in high school. Then when I got into my senior year of high school, I studied calculus and trigonometry, and I really fell in love with math. And I decided to pursue a career not so much in the biomedical sciences, but in the mathematical sciences. And at the time that I was in my late teens, 16, 17, 18 years old, the space shuttle program was still active, and it was just an exciting career option to move into aerospace engineering. And so I wanted to apply my love of math into the applied mathematics realm, and that's what led me on to aerospace engineering. And after, we can talk continuously about this, but throughout my career, aerospace engineering was a great career for me. It got my foot into the door in the sciences, and it was a phenomenal career step for me. One of the best decisions I made at the age of 17 to decide to become an engineer. I would recommend the career to anyone. However, as I got on in life, as I got older, my interests changed, and I reverted back to my original passion of medicine. And so I decided to go back to school, to leave a good-paying job in aerospace engineering and leave my job voluntarily to go to medical school. And so I went to medical school. I was living in Missouri at the time. I studied at Ohio State aerospace engineering and moved to St. Louis, Missouri to work for McDonnell Douglas, now Boeing. It was purchased by Boeing back in the 1990s. And I decided to leave the profession of engineering but stay in Missouri. And I went to the University of Missouri School of Medicine, where I earned my MD degree. And then I pursued a career in the biomedical engineering sciences by combining medicine with engineering. So although I'm not a practicing physician, practicing seeing patients on a daily basis, I use my medical degree along with my engineering degree in the field of biomedical engineering, and we can discuss that. I'd be happy to talk to you.
So tell me a little bit, not a lot of, I don't know, a lot of people at 17 are like, I want to become an engineer. Were your parents in the field? What got you interested initially? Yeah, my parents, my mother and father, Andrew and Marcia Stockard, they're sadly no longer with us, but they're always with me. They and my older brother, Gary, were the greatest inspirations to me to achieve higher education. And my parents both got master's degrees, not in engineering, actually. My father got his master's in business, MBA. My mother got her master's in education. She was a public school teacher in Toledo, Ohio, where I grew up with my brother Gary and our parents. And my brother also earned his master's degree in business. And so to have two parents and an older brother all having graduate degrees, it just wanted me to aspire to be the best that I could be, to achieve what I could. And engineering, although my parents weren't engineers, I had a lot of friends who were interested in math and engineering, and my parents were always amateur scientists, so to speak. Even though my father was in business and my mom was in education, and they were not professional scientists per se, we always had science books in the house. I mean, ever since I was a child, we had books in the house on the origin of the universe, the origin of the human species. My mother being a school teacher, she always had, of course, access to all of the best science and math books, and she was always bringing math and science books in the home. And I remember when I was 5 years old, my mother told me something I'll never forget. She told me that with mathematics, you can do almost anything.
And I never forgot that. Didn't mean a whole lot at the age of 5, but it certainly grew on me. And I remember one of my fondest memories of great childhood memories I have with both my parents. I remember my mom being a school teacher. During the summertime, yes, I had my child play outside, with my friends and riding my bike and playing outside, my childhood play, like all kids do. But in the evening when I was inside, sometimes my mom would show me a math book, and she would ask me if I could work a couple of problems, not as a chore, not as homework, not to prepare for the next academic year. No, she didn't say that math was hard. She said that math was fun. And my mom always couched mathematics as something, and science that was fun. And I also remember my mom, back in the days, this was like back when I was a kid before the internet existed, my mom had catalogs, and she would always find things that I cannot imagine how you'd find today without the internet. She would find catalogs for scientific supplies like microscopes and like light microscopes. And I remember she would take an eyedropper, and maybe after it rained outside, she would take some water from a mud puddle and place it on a glass slide and a cover slip over it and put it in a microscope and show it to my brother and I. And then we'd see all the algae or the microscopic life swimming around. And it just made me think as a little kid, with all the life that exists in that one droplet of water, think of the possibilities of life elsewhere in our galaxy and elsewhere in the universe. And my mother, she was always inspiring my brother and I to think. And my parents, one of the things they always taught my brother and I is not what to think, but how to think. The problem-solving skills, critical thinking. My parents had very scientific minds, even though they weren't in the sciences per se and by profession. And I'd have to say, therefore, my parents were the single greatest influence on me in wanting to become a scientist.
So you would recommend, let's say, for parents kind of with their kids growing up, to expose to these type of topics early on?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because we can't have, especially young people of color, studying math and science and engineering and medicine if we don't have kids who are interested, who get that spark. I think that it is a fact that all kids, when they're very young, especially when they're in preschool, grade school, those early years, all kids are scientists. All kids want to know how the world works. That's why kids get into so much mischief, right? They're always trying new things. They're always seeing how things work, cutting things open, maybe looking inside something that may or may not be appropriate to be, taking apart, but just something that will intrigue them. How does this work? And I think that if you can spark that interest in science in children while they're young, before they become jaundiced about school and about studying as a chore and not for the sake of learning for the sake of learning, then I think you'll inspire them to want to continue on in that endeavor throughout life.
No,
and that's what my parents did for my brother and I.
So did you see, or what worst challenges, if any, being a black engineer, black doctor in these spaces that are primarily not black? Were there challenges that you saw that were unique to your situation?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I can honestly say that of all the places where I could have studied aeronautical and astronautical engineering as an undergrad, Ohio State in Columbus was one of the best in the Midwest. It's one of the best schools in the Midwest for aerospace mechanical engineering. So I was going to a great school. So I knew that I was going to be getting a quality education. However, not surprisingly, at the time that I was in undergrad, there just weren't hardly any African Americans.
Around what year was this?
This was in the 1980s.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was the only African American aerospace engineering student in my class throughout the entire 4 years.
Wow.
There was nobody that looked like I was.
No one even younger or older.
No. So
Wow.
even when I was a senior, there were no freshman aerospace engineering students, not that I knew of, that I could mentor or talk to or socialize with. Just people who looked at the world the same way I did.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was until I interned at McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis for 3 summers before I graduated from Ohio State, and then worked for them full time. So I did see 1 or 2 African American aerospace engineers, but they weren't working in my department. Maybe I would see them passing in the hallway. But I have to admit, when I was 20 years old, my first summer internship back in the 1980s, I did not take it upon myself to reach out to African American or people of color engineers to talk to ask, say, hey, how has it been for you? Can you talk to me how you've gotten through this? Of course, my parents, I mean, were always there, and I would always communicated with them. They're always my greatest inspiration, my greatest role models. But yes, it would have been nice to have someone who looked like me who was in that profession. And so that was a major challenge. It wasn't easy sometimes. At my work, as a summer intern, never heard anything racially motivated, racially charged, or anything like that. I was welcome, always treated with respect. It was a professional environment. Sometimes at school, in the academic world, it wasn't always that way. And sometimes there was maybe jokes that were not appropriate. Sometimes you would see graffiti on campus. Yeah. There were times when I saw graffiti on campus that was racist.
Wow.
And this was only in the 1980s, right? And so I'm not criticizing my undergraduate institution in Ohio, but I mean, this is everywhere, right? I mean, racism exists everywhere. So it was just the time period. And but I had great friends. One of my best friends from undergraduate at Ohio State, a guy named Ron, is still a great friend of mine to this day. I've known him since the 1980s, and we still see each other at least once a year. And so I've known him all that time. Wow. And so a white person, but nonetheless, I mean, he was one of my best friends in the program. We studied together. He was one of my motivators to keep me going, to study on a Friday or Saturday night when we knew we had a test on Monday morning. So maybe not all my mentors or people that I relied on were people of color, but I always had a support group, and I would tell people of color who go into engineering, you may not always see people who look like you, but if you can find one or two people who support you, and they don't necessarily have to look like you, then that can be enough to help you to survive and to make it through. Not just survive, but to flourish, right? Yeah. We don't want to just survive. We want to flourish. We want to do well in life and not just get by. And so I've always had great friends. And every academic program at every step of the way, whether it be school or work, regardless of their race or color, that supported me and that wanted to help me make it. So
that's great. So then you finished. You went to become a mechanical engineer.
Aerospace engineer. Yeah.
So what does that look like? Like, what does that? It sounds like a very big industry. Like, what was your day to day like, or what does that mean?
Yeah. Like my first job, like I mentioned, was at McDonnell Douglas, now Boeing, but I was working on the Aviate-B Harrier. It's the vertical takeoff and landing aircraft by the United States Marines. And so it's basically an aircraft that has vectored nozzles. They can rotate vertically and can take off vertically like a helicopter could. And
really?
then
As an airplane.
Right, it's an airplane, but then they rotate, horizontally so that the plane obviously flies just like a normal airplane. It's used by the United States Marines. And nonetheless, I worked on the aerodynamic performance of that aircraft, mostly wind tunnel analysis, aircraft performance, aerodynamic performance, understanding how far the aircraft can fly on what they call in the military a sortie, a mission, SORTIE, a sortie, a mission. And so I would practice. It was almost like running a high-tech video game where I would simulate various weapon loadings on the aircraft and determine with that weapon loading how far the aircraft could fly, how high it could fly, and what the altitude, what they call the ceiling, the aircraft ceiling, so that we can report this to the United States military, so that we can say, okay, with certain weapon loadings on the wings, we can get from point A to point B in a certain amount of time, and in a certain like at a certain altitude and so forth for a combat mission.
Wow. Did that take some type of security clearance or?
Yeah, it did. Yes, I've had security clearances all throughout my engineering career. I've had security clearances of one sort or another, one level or another. Yeah, including the SCI clearance that they've talked about with this whole issue with the documents that Donald Trump had at his home in Mar-a-Lago, SCI clearance level documents. So, but it just depends upon what I was doing, and it wasn't the only job I had as an aerospace engineer. I worked for BAE Systems as well, BAE, British Aerospace of North America, and also as a contractor in St. Louis. I also worked for a small company that did satellite imaging, map making from satellite imaging, and so with all of that after I left McDonnell Douglas, I worked mostly in the digital map making from satellite imagery. And I was working for the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. You have the CIA, you have the FBI, and so another three-letter organization in the government is the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, in St. Louis, Missouri, in the downtown area. And I also had a security clearance there too. And I was working on map making from satellite imagery. So that's the aerospace application. But we're doing work for the military, all branches of the military that needed intelligence, the latest and greatest maps for knowing where troops would need to be and knowing where the enemy would be. And sometimes the Secret Service would use the NGA to understand the layout of a place before a head of state might visit. So they need the latest and greatest satellite maps. So it's not something that's too old, or and so forth. And so the NGA is a great organization. And I was not working for the government, but I was a contractor for them. Yeah. And so I had all sorts of jobs in my career.
So,
as an aerospace engineer.
This is the Black and Rich podcast, so we like to talk about money a little bit.
Okay.
So for people listening, or maybe kids listening, coming out of college, like, what are you looking at as your position? Like, what's like the starting? Like, you come out of college, are you starting at a lower wage? Or do you start six figures, and then kind of how does that career progress?
Yeah, for someone coming right out of college, you could talk about the fact that I mentor a lot of college students, so I hear about this. I see young people at the age of 22 getting out with their engineering degree, maybe making a salary in the 70s or so, which would be a good starting salary, decent starting salary. They might make a little bit more if they've had some internships or co-op terms with that company. I've heard of some students making in the 80s. It depends, again, of course, where they're living. I mean, obviously, a college student coming right out of California is going to be having a higher starting salary than the Midwest, right?
Yeah.
But I would say something like that. I don't know of any undergraduates who are just graduating with a bachelor's degree, graduating at the age of 22 with their 4-year degree, coming out with a six-figure salary. Okay. I would see someone like that being more at the doctorate level, the PhD level, maybe someone with a PhD in engineering. But then again, maybe not. They might have to work for a couple of years. It depends. A lot of the jobs, they'll say, well, we want someone with a bachelor's degree and a certain number of years of experience, or a master's degree and fewer years of experience, or a PhD and even fewer years. So obviously the degree making up for the lack of time. But I don't see people coming out of the undergraduate years with a six-figure income, more in the high five figures, which is reasonable at that time.
Especially at 22, 23.
22, 23.
And then kind of how does it progress? Like, what is if there's like a maximum, or like what do like the higher earners in the industry make?
I mean, for someone who stays at the bachelor's degree level, I mean, they could be earning a six-figure income once they maybe get to the upper echelons of their profession. Like, you start out as an engineer 1, then engineer 2, and then engineer 3. But that doesn't mean you become an engineer 2 necessarily after your first year. Maybe after your first year, maybe after your second or third year. And then once you become an engineer 3, you're a senior engineer. And then senior engineer and going on into higher levels, like a principal engineer, senior principal engineer, and so forth. And so, again, it would depend. I would imagine that someone who's at the senior engineering level, who's working out in California, might make a six-figure income. Probably not in the Midwest. Okay. But that's just adjusted for cost of living.
Yeah.
Right.
And then, so you're engineer for how many years?
I was an aerospace engineer for 16 years.
And then you said,
and I left.
I need something else.
Right, but it was a gradual evolution. It's interesting how that evolved. I mean, I told you about my aspirations as a doctor when I was in high school, but it's interesting how a book can change your life. When I was, this is going back into the 1990s, late 1990s, about 25 years ago almost, and it's interesting what I did. I read, we've all heard, of course, of Jurassic Park, and Michael Crichton was the author of the Jurassic Park novels, right? The first one, the Jurassic Park novel, and made into the classic movie from the 1990s. And then he wrote the sequel, Jurassic World, or a sequel to Jurassic Park. And I happened to read the sequel the novel by Michael Crichton. And they talked about an institution called the Santa Fe Institute. And if you have watched the Jurassic Park movies, you know that Jeff Goldblum is one of the major actors who plays a character, Ian Malcolm, in the movie and the novels. He's like a mathematician, and he studies chaos theory and understanding complex systems. And this is what the Santa Fe Institute studies. And his character in the second Jurassic Park novel was at the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico. It's a research and think tank that studies complex systems, economies, ecosystems, and so forth. How species become extinct, the dynamics that lead to new species evolving and species becoming extinct, and all sorts of things, complexity of life in general. Well, when I read this, I had never heard of the Santa Fe Institute. I thought it was fictional. I thought it was just something that Michael Crichton invented in his book. And then I looked it up, I Googled it, and then no, it's a real institute. And I thought, wow, why don't I research the Santa Fe Institute and see what they do? And I read some research papers that some people were writing, and I ended up talking to someone on the phone, and I ended up getting invited to go out to the Santa Fe Institute in New Mexico and spend a week out there to work with researchers, or at least look over their shoulders and see what they do. And I was trying to think about what it was that I wanted to do with my career, because by that time I'd already earned my master's degree in mathematics. I studied mathematics in St. Louis just 3 years after I got my bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering. And so I was trying to think, should I get a PhD in mathematics, or what can I do with this advanced math degree and engineering degree? And so I went to the Santa Fe Institute. I went to biomedical conferences throughout the United States and Canada. And I went to a mathematical biology conference, really nerdy stuff, and at a conference in at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. And I'd found this book online called Mathematical Physiology. One of the co-authors is James Keener at the University of Utah. And I saw that he was going to be speaking at the University of British Columbia. And so I went out there and went to this conference when he was going to be speaking, and I bought his book, and I took it out there, and I wanted to learn how is mathematics being used to understand the human body. And he was trying to understand how, when a person goes into a cardiac arrhythmia, how does a defibrillatory shock reset the rhythm? We know that it works, but the mathematics and how it transfers through the heart muscle and the natural pacemaker that you have in your heart that regulates your heart rhythm, how does all that work on a mathematical basis? And so I got the book, and I met Dr. Keener, and I met some of his graduate students, and he invited me a few weeks later to come out to his office at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. And I got a chance to talk with him in his office. He tried to recruit me into his PhD program in mathematics. And so I didn't end up going to his program, but it was just a way to explore what I wanted to do. And then one day when I was out in Virginia, of all places, in the early 2000s, I was living staying out there on business in Reston, Virginia for a few months. And I was living in a corporate apartment type place, watching TV one morning before going to work. And I saw this advertisement on TV, and it said, have you ever wanted to go to medical school, but you didn't have the credits to get into medical school? Now Johns Hopkins University has a post-baccalaureate pre-medical program. And so I thought, well, I was in my 30s by this time, and I didn't think you could go to medical school in your 30s. I thought you still had to be in your 20s to get into medical school. So I said, what do I have to lose to apply? And so I applied to the Johns Hopkins post-baccalaureate pre-medical program, and I got in. And I was able to move to Baltimore, Maryland, where Johns Hopkins is, and I studied some pre-med courses. I took some pre-med courses for a semester or so. And then I came back to St. Louis and resumed, working on my job, and took sabbatical from my job to do school, to get some credits, pre-med credits like biochemistry and physiology and so forth. And I did the rest of my pre-med credits in St. Louis, and then I took the medical college admissions test.
Was all that pretty easy for you with your background? Was that easy for you, or was it harder?
I'll tell you something. People have asked me that. Which was harder, medical school or getting a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering? I would say that in terms of the abstract mathematical things that you have to master to get a degree in engineering, I'd have to say that engineering was more difficult. But in terms of the sheer volume of knowledge that you have to know, to have to memorize, to pass your medical school examinations, to pass your boards, I'd have to say that medical school was far more difficult than getting a degree in aerospace engineering. And there are people, I wasn't the only person ever in the world to get go to medical school after getting an engineering degree or having a career. There are other people that have done it, but not a lot of people have done it.
On a short list.
Right. And so it gave me the opportunity, Rich, to combine medicine with engineering. And then so after I did my medical school at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri. So I moved from St. Louis to Columbia. And so for those members of your audience who don't know where Columbia is, you have, in the state of Missouri, you have St. Louis, which is on the eastern borders Illinois. And then on the opposite side of the state, 4-hour drive away, you have Kansas City, Missouri. And in the middle, halfway between, you have Columbia. Columbia, Missouri is roughly halfway between St. Louis and Kansas City. And that's where the flagship University of Missouri campus is. And that's where I moved to go to medical school. And then after medical school, in lieu of doing like an intern residency, I did research at the University of Missouri. Did research in physiology, worked in a couple of physiology labs, and got co-authored on a research paper. And I also stayed long enough to do a biomedical design, biodesign fellowship, where you learn how to design medical devices. Now there are several universities that have biodesign programs. They're usually 1 year. Stanford University out in California has one. The University of Missouri had one at the time. This is like now going back to 2015, 2016. And so for a year I was a biomed student, like a biomed fellow. And so by virtue of being a biodesign fellow, I was in the Department of Surgery. It's part of the Department of Surgery. So I was a fellow in the surgery department. It was a paid fellowship. I was paid just like a surgery fellow was being paid. And so I got a chance to watch surgeries and understand how cardiothoracic surgeries are performed. And
for us average people,
cardiothoracic means thoracic, the chest,
okay,
and means opening up the chest and performing surgery on the heart. And so one of my
open heart surgery.
Right, open heart surgery.
Okay.
So one of my last couple of rotations, whatever you call them, select electives in medical school before I graduated from medical school, was cardiothoracic surgery, where every single day, my last month of medical school, I got up every day, went to the hospital, usually had to be at the hospital by 5 a.m. First surgeries were usually at 7. And I would get a chance to watch cardiothoracic surgeries every day. Most of them were bypass surgeries. So if you don't know, or for those audience members, bypass means that there's an artery in the heart that's clogged, usually with a plaque, from a lifetime of cholesterol and so forth, buildup, and they have to take a vein out of the leg and replace it, or bypass that clogged vessel so that your heart can get enough blood. Now, if one vessel is blocked, that's a bypass, and if 2 are blocked, that's a double bypass, triple bypass, quadruple, okay, and then 5, quintuple.
That's a thing.
Right, that's quintuple bypass. That's
the biggest?
Right.
Okay.
Right, 5 vessels replaced, and so they basically have to take veins out of the leg and co-opt veins from the leg during the surgery, and make sure that they put them in, and the veins in your leg have like trap doors, so to speak, to keep the blood flowing in one direction, right? It's like a valve, right? Yeah. And so they have to make sure that when they're placing the valve from your vein, like your vein into your heart, it does make a difference whether you put it in this way or that way. Make
sure it flows right.
Right. Make sure that the blood isn't blocked, right? And so it makes a difference. And so I got a chance as a medical student to assist in these surgeries. I was standing right there, all scrubbed in, and I was assisting the surgery tech on extracting the vein from the leg and making sure that we got the vein to the surgeon and for the surgery. And it was just fascinating. And I knew that while I was in medical school doing that, I wasn't going to become a surgeon, a heart surgeon, but it got me so I really appreciated the fact that this was the only time in my life I was ever going to get a chance to see a surgery like this, probably. And during that rotation, I got a chance to assist in surgeries by standing on a footstool at the head of the patient while the patient was on bypass and reaching into the patient's chest and holding up their heart so that the surgeon could go ahead and perform his or her surgical technique on it. Now, these weren't beating heart surgeries. These are patients on bypass. So a machine is doing their breathing for them and so forth and pumping the blood through their body. But I was holding a living human heart in my hand. Not a pumping heart, a beating heart, but still a living human heart. And that was a first for me because when you're in med school in your first year, you're in an anatomy lab, but these are all cadavers, right? These are all deceased individuals, of course, and so you're holding a heart, but it's a dead heart, and so to hold a living heart in my hand during a surgery is just the chance of a lifetime, and I knew I wasn't going to ever have that opportunity again, and I haven't done that since. But it inspired me to end up going into the medical device field and to wanting to go into artificial heart valves, and so that's what led me on to Abbott. And so now here in Minnesota. Before I worked at Abbott. I did work for Johnson & Johnson in Cincinnati, Ohio for a year. So after living in Missouri for so many years, I did move back to Cincinnati, Ohio to work for Johnson & Johnson in their 3D printing department where we 3D printed life-size bone models so that orthopedic surgeons could understand patient anatomy.
Wow.
Right, so they could rehearse their surgeries. But that's not heart. That's not the heart. And so it was the job at Abbott that attracted me to wanting to come to the Twin Cities.
So explain then, what are you doing now? You combine the medical and the math. So
Right.
what does that look like for you right now?
Right. So it's not so much engineering as it is at what I do. It's more about doing the clinical work, understanding what the patient's heart valve dimensions are. So it's an artificial valve. It's a mitral valve. It's mitral. It's a valve between the upper and lower left side of the heart. You have 4 chambers in your heart, 2 upper, 2 lower. The upper chambers are called the atria, and the lower chambers are called your ventricles. And so, as not surprisingly, as we get older, as we all will, sometimes these valves fail and they don't do their job. They don't do the job of allowing blood to flow in the proper direction. And sometimes, if that valve doesn't work, when the heart squeezes, blood can go back in the wrong direction. And depending on how bad that is, you might be able to live with it, you might not. And it could get to the point where it becomes so bad, Rich, that you could be just sitting on the couch watching TV. You don't even have to be doing anything, and you could become exhausted. Wow. Because the blood, you're not getting enough blood flowing through your body. It's going in the wrong direction. And so this is a valve it's a valve that's folded in, it's folded up, it goes into a catheter. The surgeon, the interventional cardiologist, fancy term for cardiologist that in the operating room that makes a cut inside a vein inside your groin area, and then they put this catheter tube with the folded up valve in it all the way up into the heart, and then it's released and it's deployed. And so it doesn't require the patient's chest to be cut open. Wow. So it's non-invasive. And so there are several different valves that you have in your heart, not just that valve, but there are other valves that can be replaced in that manner too that are non-invasive. And that's becoming more and more the norm now, to have these non-invasive techniques whereby you can have just a small cut in a vein or an artery and have a tube with the folded up valve that's needed placed up into where it's needed, and then it's deployed, and then you don't have to have a cut across your chest. The patient, because when you have open heart surgery, I mean, the patient has to cut through your sternum, that bone, that solid bone in your middle of your chest, and they have to use a saw, while you're anesthetized, of course, a saw to cut through that bone, and they have spreaders, that spread the ribs back, right? Because the ribs will naturally want to collapse, so they have to pull the ribs back and keep them open so they can get to your heart. And so I'm not going to be too graphic. I don't want to gross anybody out here.
Already.
Right. So, but nonetheless, I mean, that's a lot. That's how they used to have to replace valves, right? But now we're getting into this methodology of being able to replace the valves without having to do all that cutting and invasiveness. Because if you have a patient who's maybe well into their 70s or 80s and they're weak, very rarely is a patient ever going to have just one thing wrong with them at that age, just their heart valve. Patients have what they call comorbidities. In other words, a lot of health issues. Mm-hmm. And so when a patient is in their 60s, 70s, 80s, they're going to have a lot of things going on with them. So they might not be able to withstand the surgery of having their chest cut open and having to go through the healing process of that. And that could take months, before that, the sternum heals, the skin, the scar tissue, everything, all that takes time, right? It doesn't heal overnight. And so for a patient who's older and more feeble, they're not going to be able to undergo an open heart surgery. They're just not going to be an option for that. And they're more than likely going to die if they don't get this new heart valve. And so this is an option, literally a new lease on life for those patients.
That's
so
amazing.
Whether it's that mitral valve, like I mentioned, or it could be the aortic valve, the valve that goes from the left side of your chest, your left ventricle, the left lower chamber of your heart, and the ventricle pumps blood through the aorta, which pumps blood through your brain, through your arms, legs, throughout your entire body. All the blood that goes from your heart out through your entire body initially goes through the aorta, and then it goes through arteries that travel throughout your body. So, and then comes back to your heart from veins. So.
Okay, well that's
a lot of talking there.
No, that's a lot of information.
A lot of information.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, you do a lot of mentoring for people coming up.
Yeah,
You know, what does that, first of all, how did that start? What does that look like for you? And if there's people maybe in the audience that are that want to connect with you, what are ways that they can connect?
Yeah. So the way I got into mentoring was I finished medical school about 12, 13 years ago. And up until that time, I had never really thought of mentoring or reaching out to younger people in high school, college, to be a guide to them. But then I thought, something? I mean, I had two great parents, two unfortunate, well-educated parents, and an well-educated older brother to help me and to give me advice and career advice. And but I wanted to make sure that it wasn't until I was older, in my 30s, till I ever heard the phrase, pay it forward. I'd never heard that phrase before. And it just, obviously, we know what it means, giving back and so forth, and getting the help that you've gotten to the next generation. And I've always felt that when you become successful, you have an obligation, a duty to send the elevator back down to help the next generation of people in your profession. And I tell people that in the original Greek, the word doctor means teacher. Whether it's a medical doctor or a doctor of philosophy or a DDS, a dentist, or what have you, doctor of any type, right? A doctor means, if you're a doctor, you're a teacher. And my opinion is that if you're a doctor, but you're not educating the next generation of people in your profession, you're not really a doctor. You're just someone who has a bunch of letters after his name. And I wanted to be a doctor that has more than just some letters after my name. I wanted to be a doctor that really helps people and helps the next generation of people. And so back shortly after I graduated from medical school, when I was still at the University of Missouri, I maintained a relationship with the medical school, of course, since I was doing research in the physiology department. And so I was still in that mode, in that environment. And it just became a natural thing for me to take on medical students or undergraduate students who were thinking of going into medicine. Not all of them were African American. I mean, some of them were white. It doesn't matter to me. I just wanted to help people. It didn't matter. But I wanted to make sure that those students, like for instance in the Student National Medical Association, which is the black, it was originally started as a black organization, but now it's the Minority Medical Student Association. The NMA, the National Medical Association, is the organization for minority doctors, for black doctors, right? Because there was a time in history when black doctors could not get into the AMA, the American Medical Association. Wow. It wasn't until the 1960s, until the 1964 Civil Rights Act, that all chapters of the AMA in the United States admitted black physicians, right? And so there's the Student National Medical Association that was founded for black and minority medical students. And so I made sure that I was reaching out to those students and helping them and being a mentor to them and talking to them about being a medical doctor. And even though I wasn't practicing but doing research, and just knowing how it feels. Sometimes you just need to talk to people who know how it feels to be the only person of color in the classroom. I mean, it doesn't even have to be medicine. It could be anything, engineering, medicine, whatever. Sometimes people of color just need to talk to somebody who knows how that feels. And that's where I wanted to make sure that I was making sure that I was reaching out to young people and talking to young people. And since then, I have always taken on, under my wing, so to speak, at least at any given time, 3 or 4 mentees at a time. At any given time over the last 12 years, I've always been 3 or 4 young people usually in college, not so much high school, but college at least, who are in their undergraduate years in engineering, or maybe some medical students, maybe in their early 20s, early to mid 20s, and just saying to them, hey, if you're an engineering student and you're looking to advance your career, let me take a look at your resume. I can give you some advice on what hiring managers are looking for, since I've been an engineer for so many years, and I'm back in engineering now after medical school. And just talking to people, meeting up with people over coffee, and just saying, hey, if you want to talk, if you want to have a Zoom meet and talk for half hour, 45 minutes, you can do that. And I'm an engineer, so I'm also a member of NSBE, NSBE, the National Society of Black Engineers. I've been a member of NSBE for 30 years now. And I went to the NSBE National Conference in Kansas City just last month in March, right? So it was a great event. For those of you who don't know it, the NSBE conference is one of the country's largest conferences. There were 13,000 people there. Wow. That's not all undergraduate students, mostly undergraduate students, but graduate students, people who've already graduated, professional engineers. So there's something there for everyone in the National Society of Black Engineers, NSBE, NSBE. And I've also, in the last few years, become a member of SHEP, the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, SHPE. I've been the secretary of the NSBE, a local NSBE chapter, the graduate chapter, Twin Cities chapter here. And I've been the secretary of the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers chapter. So I've reached out as well into the Latinx community. And I've become a member of different Latinx organizations. And I'm currently now a part of the University of Minnesota's mentorship, a pun on the word mentorship, SHPE, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers mentorship, and where I'm mentoring a young woman who's an undergraduate in engineering at the University of Minnesota. And so although I'm not Latinx, I don't identify as Latinx, I identify as African American, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm mentoring someone who wants to pick my brain, talk to me about the engineering field, about how I got my start into engineering, and so forth. And I remember several years ago, back in, I think it was 2019, I was at the NSBE conference. I believe in 2018, it was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I met a group of students there at the conference who were at Rochester University in New York. Okay, I was living in Ohio at the time. I was at Johnson & Johnson, and like I mentioned. And so I met a group of young students, graduate students. They're all getting their master's degrees in biomedical engineering. And I became friends with them. And when I was at the Johnson & Johnson booth at the conference, there was a career fair at the NSBE conference, I helped make sure to get their resumes processed, try to help them get an edge, making sure that we got them notification on possible jobs. And I became, not just a mentor, but friends with them. And there's still 1 or 2 of them to this day. I mean, that was 5 years ago, that I keep in touch with one of my mentees, talk on the phone every few months. And so I want my mentees to know that it's not just a one-off as far as talking to them. I want to make sure that they know that they've got my cell phone number, they've got my email address, they can talk to me anytime they want. I'm never too busy to talk to people. I'm never too busy to talk to young people who want to come up in this profession. So
definitely, that's what the podcast is about. I want people who succeed in the profession, who don't just go live in the suburbs, kind of stay to themselves, but come back into the community and help. Yeah. Because that's the only way we're going to be able to uplift ourselves. Yeah. So, yeah, let's get to the questions right now.
Okay, yeah. My artwork.
Your art, yeah. You have some art we can put on the screen.
Yeah. I never started drawing until 2017. I've only been drawing for 6 years. I had always been doing drawing through the computer-aided drafting, and I decided to become an artist just drawing by hand. I didn't think I had it. Didn't think when I was a child I had the talent. And I started drawing. I went on YouTube videos and looked at tutorials, and I started drawing. And I become a commissioned graphite.
That's from Game of Thrones?
Yeah, that's the actress Macy Williams, Arya from Game of Thrones. One of my better pieces. And so I become a commissioned graphite and charcoal portrait artist.
So how does that? Does someone come to you with a picture and you draw it, or you have pictures that you already have?
Yeah, but people will commission. People will ask me. Well, I have a picture of my grandchild, a picture of a family member, a picture of a dog, and they'll ask me to draw it or to depict it three-dimensionally. That is the child of a couple of friends of mine who live here in the Twin Cities area. Wow. That picture, they're 9 years old now, 11, but they were 9 when I drew that picture. So that's another portrait that I drew.
So what is this? How long does one of these pieces take?
The game of Arya, from Game of Thrones, that piece took about 20 hours or more to do, yeah. Because, I wanted that photographic look to it. Not all my portraits look like a photograph. That's not always the goal, to make it look like a photograph. You always want to put a little bit of your own, twist into it, but just to bring out the eyes of the person and bring out their soul, their character.
Oh, that's really cool.
And, that is my brother and sister-in-law's dog, Shih Tzu Terrier mix. His name was Wilson. I say was. He passed away 2 years ago at the age of 15. So he lived a great age. But life. I drew that for my brother's family before Wilson passed away, though. So they have the portrait in their home. So
wow.
Yeah, and so
that's amazing.
Just a drawing there of a golden retriever. I drew that for the child of friends of mine.
You just started a few years ago.
I just started drawing in 2017.
Wow.
That is the son. He's now 5. That he was 10 months old in that picture. That is the 10-month-old son of my best buddy from undergrad from Ohio State that I told you about, who in aerospace engineering. Ron, my friend, he lives in Michigan, and he and his wife have a now 5-year-old son. But when he was 10 months old, I drew that portrait of him.
Do you only do portraits, or do you landscapes? Do you do anything?
I've never drawn landscapes, but over the last 2 years, I started human figure drawing. Okay. And so, as you can see, portraits, obviously just the head, but over the last 2 years, since 2021, I started going to live figure drawing classes where you see a live model in front of you. We've all seen, like in movies and TV shows, where you have a live model on the stage, sometimes clothed, sometimes not, and people with their easels and drawing them. Something that's been going on for hundreds of years. I do that once a week.
Wow. Yeah. I had a class in college that was like that. I drafted that. I didn't finish it. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it.
It's fascinating. There's nothing like drawing the human body right in front of you that just can't be duplicated by a photograph.
Yeah. Any other questions there?
I don't know if there are any other questions, but I've done a lot of talking. But
yeah. Well, thank you, Kevin.
Yeah.
Is there a way, if there are people who want to reach out to you, have you as a mentor, is there a way for them to get in contact? Do you have like a website or email they can go to?
Yeah. My email address is Stockard K. My last name and first initial STOCKARDK.KS@gmail. So.
All right. I think we can link it on at the end. But if anyone's interested in medical school or engineering, please reach out to Kevin. I know he's passionate about helping out.
Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Rich.
Yeah. And thank you all for watching this episode of the Black and Rich Podcast. I think, as Kevin said, the earlier we can start our kids with learning about science and math and enjoying it, the more impact we can have. There's only so many people who can be actors and athletes, but we can have a lot of doctors, we can have a lot of engineers, a lot of those skilled professions. So if we start our kids off earlier with the education, we can see a huge impact. Well, I hope you guys tune in for next week, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich.